The Mimir's wind-filled sail tossed the Nar from starboard to port. It rippled as the storm winds blew across the red bands woven into the fabric, and then it billowed wildly, caught by another wind that pushed the Nar forward. The same wind grabbed the waves and slapped them against the hull as their speed increased. Some of the crew were still below deck, securing cargo and trying desperately to remain calm. Focusing on their job did help a little. For the ones on deck, the crashing waves made it a dangerous and slippery place, and the high winds blew past them with such force that they felt as if they were facing the cold ocean current instead. Thorfinn clutched the ship's railing, trusting the skill of his navigator to get them through this. He had chosen his navigator well. The dwarf Tostig stood barely as high as the top of the prow, but what he lacked in height he made up for in intelligence and experience. Tostig's wind-scarred face mapped the voyages of his life. He had navigated these waters many times and on many different sizes of ships. He could near accurately predict their heading and position based on time and speed. His knowledge of seabirds, wave formations, and the position of the sun and the stars was infamous. Tostig was drawing on all that knowledge and experience now. The storm, in just a short period of time, had carried an iceberg from a relatively safe distance onto a collision course with the Mimir, pushing the mountain of ice as easily as it pushed the small ship. If the wind and the waves didn't change, the floating wall of ice would definitely rip through the Mimir's hull, tearing her in two. Suddenly, the ship tilted sharply to one side. A wave reached almost as high as the mast, rolled above the Mimir, and crashed down on the creaking deck, spraying water from bow to stern. Thorfinn lost his grip and slid down the steeply canted deck toward the other side of the ship, his hands scrabbling frantically for a handhold. His yells for help were lost in the thunder of wind and rain and roaring waves. He tumbled onto his stomach, the water flowing across the deck, accelerating his slide as if he were sliding across the ice of a frozen lake. Thorfinn checked his headlong skid as the ocean swelled up again, threatening to push the water to the heavens. The Mimir's prow dipped, caught in the forming slope, then plunged to the bottom of the swell. Its sharp prow sliced through the serpent's arching back, ripped into the flesh of the ocean, then bobbed up to the exhaling surface as the trough lowered to the level of the Mimir's keel. Another swell tipped Mimir to its port side. Harold managed to hold on to the steerboard. The rowers hugged their oars. Some even managed to wrap their legs around them too. Anything that could be gripped had someone clinging desperately to it. The edge of the hatch to the lower deck, the mast, the oar ports on either side of the ship. As they fought against the rolling ocean and torrential wall of rain, Thorfinn felt for the first time on the voyage out of control. His navigator had all but taken over the task of keeping them alive. Tostig barked out orders to the victimized crew, almost to the point of scolding them for taking stupid risks. Some obeyed him, but others slithered into the cargo hold, or hugged the mast for fear of being swept overboard. We are losing our brave men to the sea, Thorfinn thought, but the storm wouldn't allow him to think of anything else before he was pulled back by the tipping of the ship, or hit with a wave of frigid water that jolted his mind back to the present. Like an ignored child, the storm did everything in its power to scream for attention. A huge wave was building up off their port side, growing larger and more threatening in its strength as it mercilessly stalked the ship. By the second, more and more water pushed into its crest, forcing the wave higher and higher. The wave hit the Mimir from the side. "Harold, turn us into the wave!" Gudrid yelled. Thorfinn watched as Harold desperately pushed on the steerboard and held it steady until the boat turned, putting the wave behind the craft. Then he pulled the steerboard as far as it would go, counteracting the tipping of the Nar. Thorfinn realized the steersman was hoping the preceding trough would push them beyond the wave's crashing crest. It was a desperate measure, but considering the size of the wave and the speed at which it was approaching, caution wasn't a luxury. The Mimir raced along the serpent's back as it rose and fell in never-ending undulations. It traveled just below the ocean's surface, but it was always there. If they could see it, they could fight it and return the water to calm, Thorfinn thought. But how do you fight a foe that you can feel moving but cannot see? Harold's desperation paid off. The rising trough lifted and pushed them beyond the range of the crashing crest. But another wave trough moved under the ship, followed by its rising crest. It lifted the Mimir's stern out of the water and slammed it down again. The Nar shuddered. Gripping their oars, the rowers struggled to tame the wild ocean, to gain some control over the ship. But trying to row in the stormy seas without direction to coordinate their efforts was fruitless. At last they let Harold steer the ship and concentrated on keeping the ship from capsizing by compensating for the unpredictable and rapidly changing movement of the ocean. "Here comes another one," Gudrid yelled, pointing at a massive crest building up on their port side. The wave roared toward them. Thorfinn looked up and knew that they couldn't outrun it. The wall of water crashed down onto the Mimir's stern. Bones cracked as bodies slammed against the hard oak deck and thudded into the side of the boat. Thorfinn tasted salt water in his mouth and gagged as the pungent liquid hit the back of his throat. He coughed and sputtered, pushing as much as he could out of his mouth, then spit a surge of bile from his stomach. He peered desperately through the wall of rain at the open sea, scanning the horizon for that one glimpse of starry sky that would be their beacon through the storm. But the clouds still rolled and darkened and spat out their blinding rain. Being washed overboard or the boat capsizing were just two perils that the crew faced. Without warm, dry clothing, they faced the possibility of freezing to death as the temperature dropped. Thorfinn saw no break in the storm, but he did note that it carried the mountainous island of ice along with the Mimir. It bobbed and tossed in the waves as easily as if it were a log being carried by a rushing river. Waves crashed over it, momentarily hiding it from view, but it quickly resurfaced as an ever-present threat. He prayed to Thor, asking for their deliverance from not only the storm's wrath, but the implacable approach of that mountain of ice. Thor did as he pleased, occasionally listening to those who prayed to him for guidance and assistance. Thorfinn hoped that this was one of those times. He sagged in relief when Tostig yelled moments later, "We're coming through the storm." The navigator pointed at the rising moon on their port side, ignoring the wet ropes of his long hair that the wind blew across his eyes and mouth. Thorfinn silently thanked Thor for releasing them from the clutches of the storm. He knew that they still had some distance to travel, but up ahead the troughs weren't as low and the crests weren't as high. The wind was much calmer and the sheets of rain had lessened to a mere downpour. Only then did he notice how his head throbbed. He gingerly touched his forehead. The contact produced a stab of pain, and his hand came away red with blood. Groaning, he let his head and shoulders sag to the wet oak deck and closed his eyes. He didn't know how long he lay so, but when he opened his eyes he saw the blurry form of Gudrid, her body swaying from side to side as she walked down the length of the yawing deck toward him. "Thorfinn, my darling, are you hurt badly?" she asked, pressing the hem of her wet skirt against his forehead to try to stop the bleeding. "I'll be fine," he answered in a bleak tone, rolling over to sit up, both hands holding his head. He staggered to his feet, his head swimming in opposition to the moving deck. The throbbing rose in protest. He saw the rising moon. "Tostig!" he yelled, clutching his forehead even tighter in response to another stab of pain. "Can you find out where we are? Once we're past the storm, I can get us back in the right direction. But I'll have to wait until the sky clears before I can get us back on course," Tostig replied. He pointed to the heaving ocean surface. "The serpent is calming." "Thank you," Thorfinn said, turning away to steady himself with a hand on the Mimir's rail. He sensed Gudrid's quick movement away from his side and turned to follow her with his eyes. She had gone to Harold. The steersman's face was an angry red from the freezing rain and battering winds, and he shivered violently in his wet clothes. Worse, Thorfinn realized his purple fingers could not let go of the wooden handle, and they seemed to be coated in a thin film of ice. As a mother would a hurt child, Gudrid wrapped her hands over his. "I think my hands are frozen to the steerboard." "I know," Gudrid gently said. "We'll get them off." Thorfinn stumbled over to help. As he placed his wet hands over Gudrid's, he looked into Harold's eyes and said sincerely, "Harold, thank you for saving our lives. I am proud to have you as part of this family." The words melted the tension from the steersman's face, just as the warmth of their hands melted the ice holding them to the steerboard. They removed their hands from Harold's and slowly pried his purple fingers from the handle. Thorfinn felt Harold's muscles tense as the pain cascaded from his stiff fingers through his body. Harold slowly placed his hands in his armpits, as if he needed to further protect them. "Gudrid," Thorfinn said, extending his hand, I need to lie down. Could you help me into the hold? Yes, of course. She put his arm around her neck and supported him as best she could. She helped him through the hatch, and they splashed through ankle-deep water. The movement of the ship had shuffled the chests they used as their bed around, and a few of the furs lay in the water, but 2 pelts they used as bedding remained dry on top of the makeshift bed. Thorfinn leaned against the crates, while Gudrid pushed the chests back together, then spread the furs on top of them. She helped Thorfinn to sit down and undressed him, running her eyes over his powerful frame. His icy wet clothing had left red patches on his chest and arms. Gudrid laid the garments out to dry in the damp salt air and wrapped his body in the dry fur. You rest here. I will go back up top to see what I can do to help on deck, she said, picking up the fur throws from the wet floor and spreading them across some crates. All right, Thorfinn answered in a docile tone and lay back. He tried to take his mind off the throbbing pain in his head and let his thoughts wander to his predecessors. He planned not to make the same mistakes they had. He didn't want to make enemies of the inhabitants of Vinland and Markland. This was not an Viking expedition, and Thorfinn had no intention of turning it into such. The word was terrible to his ears, just a euphemism for stealing, killing, and destroying. He would offer the natives the same respect as a delegation would offer a potential ally, regardless of their military or economic strength. Thorfinn drifted off to sleep, dreaming of sunny days, fields of tall grass, and fresh summer air.